Star was the most anticipated horse, charging forward with a force that left the crowd gasping. For a moment, it looked like the champion would conquer all again, but the landing was not clean. Star's legs buckled, his body collapsing in a violent somersault. The once proud horse lay in the mud now, trembling, breathing shallow and labored. Marcus Steele stood there, arms crossed, face still as his horse fell. His tailored suit remained crisp despite the storm, his expression as cold as the rain. He didn't rush to the horse's side like others might have. To Marcus, Star wasn't a living being, but an investment, a tool to win and generate profit. Now, with his legs shattered, the stallion was worthless. The chaos in the stands grew louder as people shouted for help. Star's body trembled in the mud, his breathing labored. The announcer's voice crackled over the speaker, calling for assistance, but Marcus didn't flinch. He turned away from the scene, raising his phone to his ear. "Get the truck," he barked into the receiver. Just one sentence like that, and the listener on the other end understood, as if this had happened many times. Marcus' tone was clipped, his eyes fixed firmly ahead. "It is useless." He didn't glance back at the fallen stallion as he walked away, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. The rain intensified as Star was loaded into a transport truck. The handlers worked in silence, their movements mechanical. Star's eyes followed them, wide and filled with confusion. He didn't fight. His strength had left him. The storm raged on as the truck pulled away, disappearing into the night. Hours passed as the truck wound its way through deserted roads. The rain showed no sign of letting up, and the hired men exchanged no words. When they finally stopped, it was in the middle of nowhere, a barren field on the edge of the countryside. The men opened the truck doors, hauled the injured stallion out, and left him there. One of them hesitated, glancing back at the animal lying helpless in the mud. "Poor thing," he muttered under his breath, but his partner scoffed. "Not our problem." They left him there, in the middle of the desolate field. The rain showed no mercy as it pelted down on the broken horse. Star lay in the mud, his body trembling with cold and pain. His once vibrant eyes now carried a heaviness, a question that no one was there to answer. Why had he been left behind? The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and broken branches. Sam trudged across his waterlogged fields, his boots squelching in the mud with every step. Dawn painted the sky in muted shades of orange and grey, casting long shadows over the sodden landscape. He was out to check for damage, just another routine after a rough night of weather. His eyes scanned the horizon, and then he saw it. Near the tree line, something dark lay sprawled on the ground. At first, he thought it was just a fallen branch. As he drew closer, though, he realized it wasn't. It was a horse. A big one, too, its body lying limp in the mud, its breaths shallow and ragged, stirring faint puffs of mist in the cold morning air. For a moment, Sam stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He hadn't been this close to a horse in over a decade, not since Grace. He swallowed hard, his chest tightening. Grace had loved horses, lived for them, and losing her had turned the barn into a mausoleum. He hadn't stepped inside it since the accident, but something about the way this horse lay there, beaten but not broken, pulled at him. Its dark eyes opened briefly, meeting his with a look that was both haunting and defiant. "You're not gonna make it out here, are you?" Sam muttered, almost to himself. The horse blinked slowly, as if agreeing, and Sam felt something inside him shift. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair, then bent down. "All right, big guy. Let's see if we can get you out of this mess." Getting the horse back to the barn was no easy feat. Sam didn't have the strength he used to, and Star was barely able to lift its head, let alone stand. It took every ounce of effort and a lot of coaxing, but eventually With the help of his neighbor Tom, they managed to load the injured animal onto an old flatbed trailer. Tom, always the talkative one, gave Sam a sideways glance as they worked. "Haven't seen you mess with horses since." He let the sentence hang in the air, scratching the back of his neck. Sam shot him a look that shut him up, then patted Star gently. "Just doing what needs to be done." The barn smelled of dust and mildew when they arrived. It was just as Sam had left it, tools strewn about, cobwebs hanging thick in the corners, and a layer of grime covering everything. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, back to the days when Grace would hum while brushing down her gelding, her laughter filling the space like sunlight. With Star now inside, Sam worked methodically. He cleaned out a stall, laid down fresh hay, and wrapped the horse's injured leg with an old blanket until he could get someone who knew what they were doing. All the while, memories he'd tried so hard to bury kept creeping in. He could almost hear Grace's voice, see her gentle hands at work, feel her pride when her horse had taken its first step after a bad fall. The thought made his throat tighten, but he pushed it aside. Star needed him now. By mid-morning, Sarah pulled into the driveway in her battered old pickup truck, her vet bag slung over her shoulder. She was the kind of woman who got straight to the point, no frills, no wasted time. As she approached, her sharp eyes immediately took in Star's condition. "Where'd you find him?" she asked, running her hands along Star's leg with practiced ease. "Out in the east field," Sam said. He leaned against the stall door, watching her work. Sarah glanced up at him, her brow furrowed. "He's lucky you did. This leg's a mess. Infection's a real possibility." Sam nodded, though he didn't say much. He wasn't the kind to chat, and Sarah seemed to respect that. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound and applying a proper bandage. After a while, she sat back on her heels and looked at him. "It's not going to be easy, you know. A horse like this, with an injury like that." She trailed off, letting the unspoken words hang in the air. "He's got a chance, though?" Sam asked quietly, his eyes never leaving Star. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, if you're willing to put in the work." "I'll do it," Sam said, his voice steady. Something softened in Sarah's expression. "All right then, let's get to it." For the rest of the day, Sam stayed by Star's side, doing what he could under Sarah's guidance. He wasn't sure if it was the horse that needed saving or himself, but either way, he wasn't about to give up. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the barn, Star shifted slightly in the stall, letting out a soft sigh. Sam leaned against the door, exhaustion tugging at his limbs, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was purpose, or maybe it was just the simple fact that for the first time since Grace, the barn didn't feel so empty. The barn was quiet, save for the faint rustle of hay and the soft sounds of Star's labored breathing. Sam sat on a stool near the stall, his hands rough and steady as he adjusted the wrappings on Star's injured leg. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the dusty wooden beams. The air smelled faintly of liniment, hay, and memories. "You know, my Grace used to keep this place spotless," Sam said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than the horse. "She'd be out here all day, brushing her gelding, humming whatever song she'd just heard on the radio." He paused, tying off the bandage. "It's been years since I could even set foot in this barn, let alone do something like this." Star, still and watchful, flicked an ear toward him, as if listening. The gesture brought a faint smile to Sam's face, though it quickly faded. "She loved these animals," he continued, "especially the ones people said were too broken to bother with. Said they just needed someone to believe in them. Guess I didn't understand that. Until now. Later that day, Sarah arrived carrying her vet's bag slung over one shoulder. She walked with a brisk, no-nonsense air that always seemed to soften around Sam and Star. "How's our patient today?" she asked, kneeling by the stall to inspect the bandage. "Getting there," Sam replied. "Slowly. But he's trying, and that's something." He leaned back, his hands resting on his knees. Grace would have loved him, would have seen the fight in him right away. Sarah glanced up at him, her expression curious. "You don't talk about her much." Sam hesitated, then shrugged. Not easy to most days. She was. Everything good about this place. Losing her took the light out of it. Out of me, I guess. The weight of his words hung in the air, but Sarah didn't press him. Instead, she turned her attention back to Star, her hands moving with practiced care as she checked the horse's leg. "You're doing good work here, Sam," she said quietly. "You're giving him a chance." Over the next week, Star began to show signs of improvement. The once crippled horse, who had lain motionless in the mud when Sam first found him, was now attempting to stand on his injured leg. Each shaky step brought a flicker of hope to Sam's chest, though he kept his excitement tempered. "One step at a time," he muttered to himself, watching as Star wobbled, then steadied. There were moments of mischief, too. One morning, Sam left a bucket of oats too close to the stall, only to return and find Star nudging it over, scattering the contents across the barn floor. "Oh, so that's how it's gonna be, huh?" Sam said, shaking his head but unable to hide his grin. "You've got some fight in you after all." Sarah, stopping by for her usual check-in, laughed when she saw the mess. "Looks like someone's feeling better." As the days went on, Sarah began to notice something peculiar about Star. It wasn't just his physical recovery or his growing energy. It was the way he carried himself, with a kind of quiet dignity that seemed out of place for a horse left abandoned. There was a sharpness in his movements, even in his weakened state, and an intelligence in his eyes that she couldn't quite ignore. "You know," she said one afternoon, watching Star from the paddock fence, "there's something about him. He's different, special." Sam gave her a sidelong glance. "Special how?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, frowning slightly. "It's the way he moves, even injured. The way he looks at people. It reminds me of some of the champion horses I've worked with before." Sam chuckled dryly. "Champion? This guy? He was left to die in a field." "Maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully, "but it doesn't add up. I mean, look at him. His build, his temperament. I don't think he's just any horse." That evening, curiosity gnawed at Sarah enough to prompt her to dig deeper. With Sam's permission, she took a series of pictures of Star, focusing on the details she'd noticed, his unique markings, the powerful lines of his frame, and began searching online for any matches. When she returned the next day, there was an urgency in her step. Sam met her at the barn door, raising an eyebrow at her expression. "You find something?" "You're not going to believe this," Sarah said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a video of a sleek bay stallion soaring over jumps with grace and precision. The name beneath the video read, "Star, Champion Jumper." Sam stared at the screen, then at the horse in the stall. "That can't be him," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It is," Sarah insisted. "Look at the markings. The shape of his blaze. It's a match, Sam. He's not just any horse. He's Star." Sam sank onto the nearest hay bale, the weight of the revelation settling over him. If that's true, what the hell was he doing in a field half dead? Sarah's expression hardened. Because Marcus Steele declared him day-ed, probably to save face after his injury. He abandoned him, Sam, left him to die. The name hit Sam like a punch to the gut. Marcus Steele, he repeated, his jaw tightening. I've heard that name before. Big-time trainer, right? Always in the headlines. Yeah, Sarah said grimly. And now, thanks to him, one of the best horses I've ever seen was almost lost forever. Sam looked back at Star, who was watching them with those sharp, knowing eyes. He felt a surge of anger, followed by something else, determination. Not anymore, he said quietly. Not if I have anything to say about it. The barn fell silent again, but it wasn't the heavy silence of grief that had hung there for years. This was the quiet of resolve, the kind that comes just before a storm. And Sam knew, deep in his bones, that the storm was coming. The quiet routine of Sam's farm was shattered when whispers began to ripple through the small community. A rumor spread like wildfire. A legendary horse, thought to be gone, had been seen on Sam's land. Cars started pulling up to the edges of the property, their headlights cutting through the early morning fog. People leaned over fences, craning their necks for a glimpse of Star. Children pointed excitedly, and parents muttered to each other, debating if the rumor could possibly be true. Sam came out of the barn with a pitchfork in hand, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped short at the sight of the growing crowd, his brows knitting together. "What's all this?" he called, his voice calm but firm. A few murmurs answered him, words like miracle, hero, and that horse. Behind him, Star stood in the paddock, his coat catching the morning light. He turned his head slightly, his dark eyes watching the scene with quiet curiosity. Sam sighed and leaned the pitchfork against the barn wall. He didn't want the attention, but it seemed inevitable now. By midday, the small crowd had swelled, and the story was already traveling beyond the county. Marcus heard about it quickly. His reputation had taken a hit since the first whispers of Star's survival began circulating. The idea of losing control over this narrative was intolerable to him. He needed Star back, not out of love for the animal, but as a symbol to reclaim his tarnished name. That afternoon, a sleek black car pulled into Sam's driveway. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his shoes too shiny for the gravel road. Sam watched from the porch, arms crossed over his chest. The man approached with a confident air, extending a hand that Sam didn't take. "Mr. McAllister, I'm Daniel Hayes, representing Marcus Hale. We've come to resolve this matter quickly. Mr. Hale is willing to compensate you generously for the return of his horse." Sam's expression didn't change. "Star isn't his horse anymore," he said flatly. He threw him away, just like he'd throw away a broken piece of equipment. Star deserves better. Hayes adjusted his tie, his polite demeanor slipping just slightly. "Mr. Hale regrets what happened. He's prepared to make amends. I think you'll find his offer more than fair." He handed Sam an envelope. Sam opened it, his eyes scanning the crisp legal language and the number written in bold. It was a lot of money, more than he'd ever seen in his life. He folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "Not interested," Sam said, turning to head back into the house. Hayes stepped forward, his voice rising. "This isn't just about you, Mr. McAllister. That horse belongs to Mr. Hale legally. You're in no position to—" "You can see yourself off my property," Sam cut him off, his voice like steel. "Star stays here." The tension drew the attention of the onlookers who had lingered near the edges of the farm. Several neighbors approached, their curiosity quickly turning to anger as they caught the gist of the conversation. They knew what Sam had done for Star. They'd seen the hours he'd spent nursing the horse back to health, the care and dedication he'd poured into the animal. "You've got some nerve coming here," one man called out. Others nodded, their voices joining in. The air buzzed with indignation. Hayes tried to keep his composure, but it was clear he was losing control of the situation. When someone pulled out a phone and started recording, he threw up his hands and stormed back to the car. Sarah, who'd been standing off to the side, caught the whole thing on video. By the time the sun set, The footage was already making its rounds online, accompanied by captions like, "Marcus Hale tries to buy back abandoned horse," and "Money can't erase cruelty." The story reached Marcus by evening, and his reaction was immediate. He called in favors from media contacts, planting stories that painted Sam as a thief who had unlawfully taken possession of Star. Articles popped up, accusing Sam of exploiting the horse for fame and profit. Marcus's maneuver worked, at least partially. While many people supported Sam, others began to question his motives. The equestrian world became a battleground of opinions. Star was no longer just a horse. He was a symbol, a flashpoint for debates about ethics in competitive sports. Sam was weary of the fight, but determined to protect Star. One evening, as he worked on repairing a section of the paddock fence, Sarah approached him with an idea. She leaned against the fence post, watching Star graze peacefully under the fading light. "We need to shift the narrative," she said. "Take Star to the regional horse exhibition." Sam looked at her puzzled. "He can't compete anymore, Sarah. You know that." "I'm not saying he should compete. Just show him. Let people see the horse Marcus threw away. Let Star tell his own story." Sam thought about it for a long moment. He didn't want to expose Star to more scrutiny, but he also knew that hiding wasn't the answer. "You really think it'll help?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "People need to see what you've done for him. They need to see what he's become." The idea began to take shape. Sarah reached out to the event organizers, explaining Star's story and the interest it had generated. They were hesitant at first, but ultimately agreed. Star wouldn't compete, but would be allowed to appear as a special guest. As the date approached, the buzz surrounding Star only grew. People wanted to see the horse who had defied the odds, who had survived abandonment and injury to stand tall once more. Sam worked tirelessly to prepare, making sure Star was healthy and presentable. He knew this wasn't just about the horse. It was about proving that resilience and care could triumph over greed and neglect. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling exhibition grounds. The air buzzed with excitement as spectators filled the stands, their voices merging into a hum of anticipation. Children pointed excitedly at the horses warming up, and older spectators reminisced about past champions. Near the entrance of the exhibition ring, Sam adjusted the halter on Star, his large hands steady, but his heart thudding in his chest. Star, his sleek bay coat gleaming in the sunlight, stood tall and alert, his ears flicking toward the noise. Sam took a deep breath, murmuring to the horse, "You ready, boy? This is your show now." Star tossed his head, his dark eyes meeting Sam's with an almost knowing intensity. The bond between them was palpable, forged through months of care and quiet resilience. When Sam led Star into the ring, the crowd stilled, their murmurs replaced by whispers of recognition. "Is that? Could it be?" An elderly man in the front row muttered to his companion. Heads turned as Star moved with a regal grace, his every step exuding a quiet strength. He wasn't the soaring champion they remembered, but there was something even more compelling in his grounded presence. The whispers grew louder, and soon applause rippled through the stands, tentative at first, then building into a wave. Sam guided Star in a slow circle around the ring. The stallion moved with a deliberate, steady rhythm, his gait even and strong despite the injury that had once threatened to end him. Every step seemed to defy the odds, telling a story of perseverance and dignity. Sam walked alongside him, his own back straight, his jaw set with quiet pride. He didn't need to say anything. Star was speaking for both of them. As the applause swelled, a voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold. "That's my horse." The crowd turned as Marcus Steele stepped forward, his tailored suit immaculate and his expression like carved stone. Flanking him was a man carrying a briefcase, his lawyer, who trailed behind with a clipboard and an air of self-assured authority. Marcus strode to the edge of the ring, pointing at Sam and Star with an accusatory glare. "You've had your fun, McAllister, but Star belongs to me, and I'm here to take him back." His voice was measured, almost practiced, but the undercurrent of anger was impossible to miss. Sam paused mid-step, his hand tightening on Star's lead rope. He turned to face Marcus, his weathered features calm but unyielding. "You abandoned him," Sam said, his voice steady but laced with restrained fury. "Left him to die like he was nothing. You don't deserve him." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, their eyes darting between the two men. Marcus's lawyer stepped in, his tone as cold as the steel his client was named for. "The horse is legally Mr. Steele's property. We have documentation to prove it. If you refuse to return him, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action." Sam stood his ground, his shoulders squared. "Go ahead and try. But the world's already seen what you did, Steele. You might own a piece of paper, but you don't own his spirit." Before Marcus could respond, a new voice broke through the mounting tension. "Wait!" A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her dark hair pulled back into a practical ponytail and a thick folder clutched in her hands. Jessica, a former employee of Marcus's stables, climbed into the ring with a determined stride. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. All eyes were on her as she faced Marcus, her expression a mix of defiance and resolve. This man doesn't care about the animals in his care. He only cares about what they can win for him, and when they can't win anymore, he throws them away. Marcus's face twisted in anger, but Jessica pressed on, addressing the crowd now. "I worked for Marcus Steele for years. I saw what happened to horses like Star when they got injured, and I have the proof to back it up." She held up the folder, which the lawyer immediately tried to dismiss as inadmissible. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Murmurs of outrage spread as Jessica handed the documents to the event organizer. Emails, logs, and witness statements, all detailing Steele's neglect and cruelty, were laid bare. The organizer's brow furrowed as he read, and finally he looked up, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Until these allegations are investigated, Star will remain in Sam McAllister's care." The stands erupted into applause, the sound echoing across the exhibition grounds. Marcus glared at Jessica, then Sam, his fury barely contained. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "That horse is broken. He'll never be what he was." Sam looked at Star, who stood tall and proud despite the tension in the air. He turned back to Marcus, his voice calm but resolute. "Maybe not. But he's more than what you ever saw in him. He's got heart, and that's something you wouldn't understand." Star, as if sensing the moment, let out a strong, clear whinny that cut through the noise. The crowd erupted again, their cheers a mix of admiration for the horse and disdain for the man who had tried to claim him. Marcus turned on his heel and left, his lawyer scrambling to keep up. As the sun dipped lower, painting the ring in hues of amber and gold, Sam stood beside Star, his hand resting lightly on the stallion's neck. The crowd began to disperse, but the moment lingered. For Sam, for Star, and for everyone watching, it was clear. This wasn't just a victory, it was a redemption. The morning sunlight spilled across the fields, casting a warm glow over the barn. Inside, Star stood quietly, his coat shimmering as Sam brushed him with steady hands. The once wounded stallion now carried himself with quiet dignity, his every movement a reminder of his remarkable journey. The air inside the barn was calm, but outside, the storm of public opinion surrounding Marcus was far from over. Jessica's documents had ignited a wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting the proof of Marcus's unethical practices to anyone willing to listen. Emails, invoices, and testimony revealed a pattern of negligence and cruelty. The abandonment of Star was just the tip of the iceberg. Within days, protests against Marcus's stables began to grow. Justice for Star signs popped up at equestrian events, while social media buzzed with calls for a full investigation. Marcus, once untouchable in the industry, now found himself cornered. Sponsors pulled out, citing concerns over the backlash. Former employees began to speak up, their accounts painting an even darker picture of Marcus's operations. It wasn't long before local authorities confirmed they were launching a formal investigation. For Sam, it was a relief, but he knew the fight wasn't over. On a crisp afternoon, Sam leaned against the paddock fence, watching Star graze peacefully. Maggie, the veterinarian, walked up beside him, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You've done good work here," she said, handing him a cup. Sam nodded, his eyes still on Star. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about him. He deserves better." Maggie smiled, taking a sip of her coffee. "Well, you've given him a real second chance. Not everyone would have done that." But Marcus wasn't going down without a fight. In the days that followed, he launched a smear campaign against Sam, accusing him of stealing Star and misrepresenting the truth. A carefully crafted press release painted Marcus as a misunderstood figure who had been unfairly vilified. The horse was injured beyond recovery, one article claimed. Marcus Steele did everything he could to ensure humane treatment. Sam felt the weight of those words like a punch to the gut. Sitting at the kitchen table that evening, he read the articles with clenched fists. "They're twisting everything," he muttered. Jessica, seated across from him, shook her head. "The truth's out there, Sam. People aren't buying it. Just look at the comments." Sure enough, public reaction leaned heavily in Sam's favor. Photos of Star's recovery, his glossy coat and strong legs, stood in stark contrast to Marcus's hollow statements. Still, the fight wore on Sam. He spent long nights in the barn, his hands busy with repairs or cleaning, his mind replaying Marcus's accusations. Star often watched him from the corner of the stall, his dark eyes filled with quiet understanding. One evening, as Sam tightened a loose hinge on the barn door, Jessica appeared in the doorway. "You're doing it again," she said, arms crossed. Sam looked up, confused. "Doing what?" Jessica stepped closer. "Carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. You've already won, Sam. You and Star. The rest is just noise." Her words stayed with him. The next morning, Sam made a decision. He would no longer let Marcus's words define the narrative. Instead, he would focus on the future. The idea came to him as he watched Star trot across the paddock, the stallion's strength and grace a testament to resilience. What if this place could be more than just a farm? A week later, Sam stood in front of a small gathering of friends and supporters in the barn. Jessica and Maggie were there, along with a few neighbors who had lent a hand during Star's recovery. "I've been thinking," Sam began, his voice steady. "This farm, it's not just for me anymore. Star's story has shown me that every animal deserves a second chance, and I want to make sure they get it." Maggie smiled warmly, and Jessica gave a small nod of approval. The idea of turning the farm into a sanctuary took root quickly. Sam spent his days preparing, converting old stalls into comfortable spaces for more horses, repairing fences, and spreading the word. Donations began to trickle in as the story of Star's journey continued to inspire. Star became the heart of the sanctuary. Visitors came to see him, to hear about his triumph over abandonment and injury. Children stood in awe as Sam recounted the day he found Star in the mud, a broken horse who refused to give up. Star seemed to relish the attention, often nudging Sam for treats or standing patiently as visitors stroked his sleek coat. The sanctuary, named Rising Spirit, became a beacon for animals and people alike. Each horse that arrived brought its own story of hardship, and each found a new beginning under Sam's care. Star led the way, his calm demeanor and undeniable strength embodying everything the sanctuary stood for. Though the fight with Marcus had left its mark, Sam no longer dwelled on it. Star's recovery and the lives of the other horses now thriving on the farm were proof enough that good could triumph over greed. One quiet evening, as Sam stood by the paddock watching the horses graze, Maggie joined him once again. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "this place wouldn't be what it is without you." Sam smiled faintly, his eyes on Star. "It's not just me," he said softly. "It's him. He showed me what's worth fighting for." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in golden light, Star lifted his head, his ears flicking toward Sam. The bond between them, forged in struggle and healing, was unspoken but unbreakable. The sanctuary was a testament to second chances, and Star was its brightest star. The mornings at Rising Spirit began with the soft sounds of horses stirring in their stalls and the crisp bite of fresh air rolling in from the fields. Sam Foster had come to cherish this quiet time, walking through the barn with measured steps, the wooden planks creaking faintly under his boots. He greeted each horse as he passed, pausing just a moment longer at Star's stall. The bay gelding stood tall, his coat gleaming with health and vitality. He wasn't the same broken animal Sam had found months ago. Now Star carried himself with an undeniable grace, even with his racing days long behind him. "Morning, buddy," Sam murmured, resting his hand lightly on Star's neck. The horse flicked an ear toward him, as if to say he'd been waiting. These moments grounded Sam, reminding him of how far they'd come. It wasn't just Star who had been given a second chance. Sam had found his own path forward, one step at a time. Word of the sanctuary had spread faster than Sam expected. Rising Spirit was no longer just a quiet corner of the countryside. People arrived daily, some with stories of their own, rescued animals, personal struggles, and a need to see the place where hope seemed to take root. Volunteers offered their time and expertise, and donations trickled in steadily. Sam never imagined the community would rally around his farm, but here they were, bringing life and energy he hadn't felt since before Grace's accident. One afternoon, Sarah Hayes pulled her truck into the drive, stepping out with her ever-present veterinary bag slung over her shoulder. She waved at Sam, who was unloading hay from the back of a trailer. "Got time for a quick check-in on Star?" she called. "Always," Sam replied, brushing dust off his gloves. He led Sarah toward the paddock, where Star grazed alongside a few other rescues. Sarah's gentle, no-nonsense demeanor had become a constant at Rising Spirit, and Sam was grateful for her steady presence. As Sarah examined Star's leg, Sam leaned against the paddock fence, watching her work. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "this place, it's starting to feel like it has a purpose again. Like, it means something." Sarah glanced up briefly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It does, Sam, and so do you." Later that week, Jessica Lane, a former employee of Victor Steele's stables, arrived at the farm with a folder full of notes and a head full of ideas. "We should host a community event," she said, her enthusiasm contagious. "Something that not only introduces people to the sanctuary, but also teaches them about humane treatment for animals." Sam hesitated. The idea felt big, almost overwhelming. "You really think people would come to something like that?" Jessica grinned. "Are you kidding? Star's story has already reached so many people. They'd jump at the chance to visit him, and the rest of the farm. Plus, we can use it as a platform to talk about what we're trying to change." Reluctantly, Sam agreed, and over the next few weeks, the team worked tirelessly to organize the event. Flyers were distributed, schedules were planned, and the farm buzzed with preparations. On the morning of the event, Rising Spirit was alive with activity. Families arrived in droves, their children darting excitedly between stalls. Jessica led a session on proper care for horses, using Star as the perfect example of recovery and resilience. As the day unfolded, Sam found himself in the barn, sharing Star's story with a small group of visitors. His voice was steady, though his words carried the weight of memories he hadn't shared in years. "When I first found him," Sam said, patting Star's shoulder, "I wasn't sure he'd make it, but he fought. And in that fight, he reminded me that there's always something worth holding on to, even when it feels like there isn't." The crowd listened intently, and Sam felt a quiet sense of pride. Star had become more than just a horse. He was a symbol of survival, proof that even in the face of abandonment and loss, there was still room to heal. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam sat on the porch with Sarah and Jessica. The event had been a success, and the farm was quiet again, save for the occasional nicker of a horse in the distance. Sam sipped his coffee slowly, the warmth seeping into his hands. "You know," he began, his voice softer now, "this place, it's more than a sanctuary. It's a piece of grace, too." He glanced toward the paddock, where Star stood motionless against the fading light. She would have loved this, every bit of it. Sarah placed a hand on Sam's arm, a quiet gesture of understanding. Jessica nodded, her expression solemn. "She's here, Sam. In everything you've done, she's right here." In the days that followed, Rising Spirit continued to grow, attracting more visitors and spreading its message further. Star, ever the symbol of hope, remained the heart of the sanctuary. Children loved feeding him treats, and adults found themselves moved by his quiet strength. For Sam, it was enough to know that his farm had become a place where people and animals could find solace. One quiet morning, Sam stood at the edge of the paddock, watching Star graze alongside the other horses. He thought of Grace again, her laughter echoing faintly in his memory. This time, the thought didn't hurt. It felt like warmth, like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. "You've done good, buddy," Sam said softly, addressing Star as much as himself. "We've both come a long way." Star lifted his head, his ears twitching towards Sam's voice. The connection between them was unspoken, but it was real, a bond forged through shared pain and newfound purpose. The sun climbed higher, casting its golden light over the fields. Rising Spirit, once a forgotten piece of land, now stood as a testament to resilience, compassion, and the power of second chances. And in the center of it all was Sam, not just surviving, but truly living. The story of Rising Spirit had begun as a quiet whisper of hope, but now it had grown into a powerful roar. The revelations about Marcus Steele's cruelty had spread like wildfire, sparking outrage far beyond the equestrian world. Jessica's evidence, meticulous records, damning emails, left no room for denial. Public opinion turned sharply against Steele. He tried to counter the accusations, but the proof was undeniable. Interviews with former employees piled on the weight of the scandal, and Steele's once proud reputation crumbled under the sheer force of collective disgust. Sam watched the news coverage from the modest kitchen of his farmhouse. Jessica and Sarah sat with him, the air between them thick with a mix of relief and weariness. Jessica spoke softly. "It's over for him, Sam. They'll shut him down for good." Sam nodded, his gaze distant. "About time someone held him accountable," he muttered. Then, after a moment of silence, he added, "It doesn't change what he did, but maybe it'll stop him from hurting anyone else." The Rising Spirit Sanctuary became a beacon of hope, its gates welcoming an increasing number of visitors. Families, young children and older folks came to see the horses, to hear their stories, and to learn about second chances. Volunteers poured in, eager to lend a hand, inspired by the sanctuary's mission. Some cleaned stalls, others helped repair fences or guided visitors around the paddocks. Everyone who came left with a piece of Rising Spirit's quiet magic. Jessica and Sarah were tireless. Jessica used her background in animal care to develop educational programs for the sanctuary, while Sarah worked on fundraising efforts, reaching out to communities and businesses to support their work. Sam marveled at their energy and commitment. "You two are the heartbeat of this place," he said one evening, leaning against the barn door as the sun dipped low. Sarah smiled. "No, Sam. The horses are the heartbeat. We just help keep the rhythm." Word about Rising Spirit spread. Local newspapers featured stories about Star, the stallion who had once been a champion. His fall and resurrection mirrored the sanctuary's mission. Soon, Sam found himself invited to speak at gatherings and community events. Though public speaking wasn't in his nature, he couldn't deny the importance of the message. Standing before crowds, he shared Star's journey and what it had taught him. "It's not about the trophies," he said at one event, his voice steady. "It's about finding the strength to keep going, even when the world turns its back on you." Despite his reservations, Sam's words resonated. People listened, moved by the raw honesty of his story. Rising Spirit wasn't just a place for horses, it was a reminder that everyone deserved a second chance, no matter how far they'd fallen. Back at the sanctuary, life continued to bloom. The paddocks were filled with horses that had once been discarded, but now ran with newfound freedom. Star, the stallion who had endured so much, led them with quiet authority. His strides were confident, his spirit unbroken, and his presence inspired every horse and human around him. One quiet afternoon, Sam stood by the fence, watching Star gallop across the pasture. The other horses followed, their movements synchronized like a dance. The sight filled him with a peace he hadn't felt in years. His mind wandered to Grace. He imagined her here, her laughter blending with the rustling of the grass. The memory didn't sting as it once had. Instead, it felt warm, like a part of her still lingered, watching over him and the sanctuary she would have loved. Star slowed to a trot and approached the fence, his dark eyes meeting Sam's. The connection between them was unspoken, but profound. Sam reached out, resting his hand on Star's strong neck. "You did it, boy," he said softly. "You reminded me what it's all about." The sun dipped lower, casting a golden light over the sanctuary. Rising Spirit had become more than just a refuge. It was a symbol of resilience, of redemption, of the extraordinary things that could happen when someone chose to care. As Sam stood there, the world felt whole again, even if just for a moment.